To Georgia Southwestern State University. I'm Professor Bonnie Levine Berggren, and it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's Global South Lecture. This lecture series is named after and endowed by the late Professor Harold Isaacs, who served as a history professor at Georgia Southwestern for 49 years. During his tenure at GSW, Professor Isaacs taught courses in Latin American history, African American history, and established minors in Black Studies and Third World Studies. In 1981, he launched the Third World in Perspective seminar series, and 2 years later, he established the Association of Third World Studies. In 1984, the Journal of Third World Studies followed. This journal addressed the problems and issues facing less developed countries all over the world. Following Professor Isaacs' death in 2015, the name of the journal was changed to the Journal of Global South Studies and is now published by the University of Florida on behalf of the now named Association of Global South Studies. As part of his bequest to GSW, Professor Isaacs requested that the monies be used each semester to bring a guest speaker to campus to talk to the campus community about issues and opportunities in the Global South. Tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Sunita Manian. Dr. Manian is a professor of political economy and women and gender studies at Georgia College and State University. She currently serves as the chair of the Department of Philosophy, Religion, and Interdisciplinary Studies. Dr. Manian received her PhD in economics at Tulane University. Her research focuses on gender and sexuality through an intersectional lens. She has published on the topics of sex trafficking, immigration, diasporic dislocation, and public health as it relates to South Asia and the South Asian diaspora. Her book, HIV, AIDS in India, Voices from the Margins, was published in 2017. She is currently working on her next book on youth sexuality in India, based on ethnographic research which she has conducted. Tonight, she will be speaking to us on situating contemporary queer narratives from South Asia. Welcome, Dr. Manian.
Thank you all for having me. It is a pleasure to be back here. I actually gave this Harold Isaacs Global South Studies lecture that Dr. Parkinson had, right? Brian. I knew you as Brian. And so Brian had organized. And so it's lovely to be back. And Bonnie, thank you, Dr. Levine Berggren, for arranging this. I know it's been, you emailed me so many times. I know it's a lot of hard work to put this sort of thing together, so thank you for organizing it. I knew Dr. Isaacs through my association with the Global South Studies Association, and it's really an honor and privilege to honor his legacy and his commitment to the study of the Global South. So like Professor Levin Berggren told you, my current research has been on youth sexuality in India. I've spent several years interviewing young people, and today what I would like to talk about is how my informants who are queer, how their lives are situated in the historical and cultural context. So, all right. I'm going to start with Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code. Is the law. It was the law until 2018, and this was a law that basically criminalized homosexuality. Okay, and the term that it used was, it called homosexuality acts against the order of nature. And I'll talk a little bit more about the context of this law later in the talk, but I just want to start with, in 2009, the Delhi High Court, which is, New Delhi is the capital of India, and so the Delhi High Court read down this law. Basically what it did was it decriminalized same-sex sex among consenting adults. And when that happened, this is what the opposition party, one of the leaders of the opposition party, said. He said, India is being disrobed by the Western culture, and the government is being a mute spectator in all this. It did not even challenge the High Court order that scrapped Section 377 of the IPC. Okay? So this idea that India is being disrobed, right, dishonored in front of the world by Western culture, right? So homosexuality is considered Western, and this is somehow against Indian culture. So that non-heterosexual sex is Western is deeply ingrained in the rhetoric that claims to hold the mantle of national culture. Okay? So is that really the case? I'm going to start with that question. So contextualizing contemporary experiences, sexual and gender fluidity. So I'm going to start with the case of several Hindu gods. In this case, they're gods. We have stories about goddesses as well, but in this case, they're gods. So Vishnu is the god who is known as the preserver. Okay, he's the god who takes various incarnations to save the world at various times. He is also a god who often in various mythological stories transitions to a female form called Mohini. The word Mohini itself means she who seduces. Okay, so in this form, he is the seductive, beautiful woman. And there is one story in the Hindu mythological texts where another god, Shiva, he is known as the destroyer. Shiva falls in love with Mohini. So when Vishnu takes the form of Mohini, this other male god, Shiva, sees her, thinks she's very beautiful, wants to have sex with her, and does have sex with her. And these two male gods who give birth to another god called Ayyappa. So in other words, so this is an image of the god Shiva pursuing Vishnu in the form of Mohini. Okay? And the two of them have a son whose name is Ayyappan, and he is also known as a Yoni Jata, he who is not born of a vagina, okay, because he is the son of two male gods, okay? And there is also another story in Hindu mythology where it's a story of this king called Bhagirath. And I don't want to go into the details of the story, but he's central to the coming of the Ganges. So Ganges is the sacred river that's supposed to wash away people's sins in India, in Hinduism. And Bhagirath is the son of two women. In fact, in his name, Bhagirath, the word Bhag means vagina. Okay, so he is one who's born of two women. And so that was about same-sex sexuality, but you also have many examples of gender fluidity. So Shiva, who we saw in the previous slide, he also sometime in some depictions takes the form of Ardhanarishwara. Okay, that's the word you see at the beginning. Ardha means half. Nari means woman. Ishvara means God, okay, as opposed to a goddess. So this is a half-woman god. He is depicted as having both a male and female essence together, okay? And that isn't the only example. in this other religious text called Mahabharata, you have the god Krishna. Krishna, by the way, you saw in the previous slide there was the god Vishnu, and I said he takes incarnations. One of his incarnations is of Krishna. And in this really important text called the Mahabharata, if you've heard of the Bhagavad Gita is a small part of the Mahabharata, okay? And in the Mahabharata, what happens is it's basically, it's a battle between good and evil. And the good people, the Pandavas, are told that in order to win the war, they have to sacrifice a valiant warrior, okay? And so, this one warrior named Aravan says, okay, you can sacrifice me, but before I die, I want to have one night of knowing what it is to be married. No woman would marry him because he's going to be sacrificed the next day and she's going to become a widow. And so Krishna becomes a woman, okay, and marries this warrior called Aravan, and therefore becomes Aravani, the wife of Aravan, okay? In India, in the part of India where I've done some of my research in Tamil Nadu, and this is where my previous book's research came from, transgender women call themselves Aravani, right? It's a very powerful term because it's the term of the god Krishna when he transitions into a woman and becomes Aravani. And in fact, because of this, Aravanis are actually, so every year there's a festival. Actually, in April is when this festival takes place. And it's in the temple to Aravan, and this is image of the festival in this village called Kuvagam, where transgender women relive this idea of being Aravani, being married for a week, and then becoming widowed when the husband Aravan is sacrificed. And what's very interesting, and you can kind of see that to this day, this is sort of kept seen as something very sacred, when at the end of the week, when the Aravanis are sort of widowed and their bracelets are broken, they're made out of glass. When they're broken, the nearby farmers will take those shards of glass and put it in their fields, because transgender women are supposed to have the male and female essences in one body, therefore being able to confer fertility. Okay, so they're actually seen as people who can actually create things. So they can, they are the reason that the crops grow. In the Mahabharata, there is also somebody who is born as a woman called Shikandini, who transitions to a male Shikandi. Okay, so you have all these various examples of really important critical figures in these stories who are either gender fluid or they transition between genders. There is actually also, this is an image of Krishna in the battlefield with this warrior Arjuna. And in fact, Krishna, other than being this, in this case, a charioteer and an advisor to Arjuna, he's also known as this incredible lover. Okay, so there are lots of stories about him seducing women. And Arjuna there's a part of the Mahabharata where Arjuna wants to know Krishna not just as a friend, but the way the women know him. So Krishna's consort Radha turns Arjuna into a woman Arjuni so that he can have sex with Krishna. Okay, so you have all these different examples of gender transition. Now, Indian culture is not shaped only by Hinduism. Muslim traditions have left their stamp in India as well, okay, because we have had various Muslim rulers for over 1,000 years. So Muslim Sufi traditions in India are very rich in examples of same-sex love. Okay, and I'm going to give you a few examples here. This is an image of a really significant poet called Amir Khusro. And this is his teacher, a Sufi saint named Nizamuddin Aulia. And they were, you see, okay, I'll let you decide. So this is something that Amir Khusro, the poet, wrote to his teacher, Pir would be the name, okay, the sort of the saint who is the teacher to the disciple, the Murad. So this is what Amir Khusro writes to Nizamuddin Aulia. I gave you my life, O cloth dyer, for you dyed me your hue when our eyes met. Khusro has given himself to Nizam. You made me your bride when our eyes met. Okay? And so Sufism talks about love as the most important thing in the world. Okay? And Sufi poetry is about the human soul wanting to be merged with the divine spirit. Okay? And this kind of opens the door for a lot of Sufi writings to be read in terms of sexuality as well. And in South Asian culture, when two people are buried together, it tells you about the deep love that they shared. If you know about Taj Mahal, it is where Shah Jahan and his wife Mumtaz Mahal lie side by side. Okay? And when Nizamuddin Aulia died, he told his disciples that eventually when Amir Khusro died, they would be buried together. And to this day, their graves are next to each other. Okay? And here's something that Amir Khusro wrote in the epitaph on Nizamuddin Aulia's grave. He said, "The beauty sleeps on her bridal bed, her tresses all over her face. Come, Khusro, let's go home, for darkness settles all around." There was a huge age difference between the two of them. Amir Khusro was fairly young, but he was so broken-hearted, he followed Nizamuddin Aulia in less than a year. He died very shortly afterwards. Last week in Pakistan, there would have been this really important festival called Mela Chiragan, where it's a Sufi saint called Shah Hussain, who is buried next to his lover, Madho Lal. So this is an image of Shah Hussain, and this is an image of the inside of the dargah, where they are buried together. And this is something that Shah Hussain wrote to Madho Lal. Okay, in South Asia, there is this very famous, like a Romeo-Juliet story, where here is the Juliet, Ranjha is the Romeo. Okay, so he writes as if he is here and Madho Lal is Ranjha. And he says, "I called out to Ranjha so many times that I myself have become Ranjha. Dear friends, call me Ranjha. No one call me Heer anymore." And in fact, in the real life, he changed his name from Shah Hussain to Madho Lal Hussain. He brought his lover's name to his and combined them so that they are one person. Okay? This is an image of, there's a very important emperor called Mahmud of Ghazni. Ghazni is a city now in what's today Afghanistan. So Mahmud in real life had a general named Ayaz. We don't know if the real life Mahmud and the real life Ayaz were lovers. What we do know is that for about 800 years afterwards, there have been hundreds of poems and songs written about the love that they had for each other. And their love is seen as sort of iconic love, true love. Okay, and one of the ghazals about their love says, "Ayaz's sweet mouth drawing closer, his smile fully prepared, his lips set for the charge. Then from his smile, sweetness boiled over. He took the wine cup from the sultan's hand. The sharing of wine is a metaphor for kissing, okay, in this tradition. So when it says he took the wine cup from the sultan's hand, it means that he is giving in to the sultan's love. From that moment, Ayaz was the cupbearer of Mahmud, whose whole world became drunk with his playful grace. Okay. There is also a tradition of lesbian poetry. So it's called Rekhti poetry, and it's supposed to have been originated in poems written by women who are courtesans to each other, okay? Even though the courtesans had lovers who are men, that was the point of their being courtesans, but their lovers, the people that they actually loved, tended to be women, okay? And so there's one Rekhti poem called Chapti Namaz by Jurat. And sometimes you'll be on top of me, sometimes I, your slave, will be on top. When the body rubbed all over, the heart's delight is multiplied. When passion overflowing swells the womb's mouth, how can I stop? Okay. This doesn't sound quite as poetic translated in English, but I'm quite sure the original is very beautiful. Okay, so if that is the case, why did the person I quoted at the beginning say that the ending of the law against homosexuality is an example of Indian culture being disrobed in front of the world by Western culture? And for that, you have to go to British colonialism and Victorian law, okay? So Thomas Babington Macaulay, he was the person who created the Indian Penal Code of 1861. And in that, Section 377 basically made sodomy, bestiality, and buggery, as it referred to, acts against the order of nature, something that would be punishable as a crime. And in fact, the British went on to impose and apply the Indian Penal Code to their colonies in Africa and the Caribbean as well. And there was the Criminal Tribes Act. So according to the British, certain tribes just genetically were criminal. Okay, so those tribes were criminal tribes, and they'd listed out what those were. And they amended it to include an act for the registration of criminal types and eunuchs being transgender women, okay? And this happened in 1897. So basically with those laws, they made sure that anything other than heteronormative sexuality or cisgender identities would be illegal. And what is interesting is when British colonialism brings these laws and speaks of non-heteronormative sexuality as something that is barbaric, what you find is that Indian nationalism responds to this homophobia and transphobia by saying that you are right. I mean, our culture does not have homosexuality. Okay, so they kind of erase their own the sort of diverse sexuality, the history of diverse sexuality, and reinvent a very heteronormative history for themselves. Okay, and we can talk about this a little bit more in the Q&A as to exactly how that happened and so on. But for now, that I'll just tell you that's what happened. And you also find that under educational reforms that the British take, Western education replaces vernacular education. So all the poems, right, that are written that have these homoerotic not just subtext, they are homoerotic texts, are not what people are reading anymore, right? So you kind of, within a couple of generations, erase the existence of sexual and gender diversity in history. And so in the 20th century, when this writer called Ugra writes a series of short stories that all have a homosexual theme to it, he calls it chocolate. He calls it chocolate, saying that so he's writing these stories that are homosexual, right? That's the basis of it. But he's calling it chocolate. It's something that came from the West, introduced by the West, but it's delicious and let's enjoy it, right? So he doesn't go back to saying this is our past because he doesn't probably even know it as his own past. But it's something that is coming from the West and it's okay to embrace it, okay? And anything that's non-cis heteronormative is denounced as Western by the time we come to the 20th century, and it continues to some extent to this day as well. And you have this cultural silence that dissents about non-heteronormativity in India. So this is the basis for what I'm going to talk about in terms of my own interviews. Okay, so I'm going to start with the case of let me just tell you about my research itself. So this is a map of India, and my interviews were done in the city of Chennai, in the city of Tiruchirappalli in the south. In the west, there's I don't know if you can see it, but there's a town called Vadodara, Kolkata and Ultadanga, and Mograhat in the east. Okay, so in these various places, and the interviews were conducted in Hindi, Bengali, Tamil, Urdu, and English. Okay, so everything that I'm presenting to you is more or less my translation into English if it wasn't already in English. So Sagun was somebody I interviewed. He was a young man who grew up in a very traditional household. Our interview took place in Hindi. He was not very comfortable speaking in English. So he said to me, I want to share my life with you. When I was in Rajasthan, which was a state sort of in the northwest of India, when I was in Rajasthan during my childhood, I used to feel that I'm the only boy who liked boys. I'm the only one who is doing this pap, which is an evil deed. Okay? That is how I used to feel. This is because I could not speak to anyone around me about this thing. And Sagun's parents did not know about his sexuality, but he also said, from class 11 itself, I wanted to join a dance program. In fact, when I interviewed him, he was getting his master's and studying dance, getting a PhD in dance. But my father would not let me do it and forced me to do a BA degree. He did not support me very much. He felt that if I learned classical dance, I would become more feminine than I already was. Okay. There was another young man named Ranjit. Ranjit came from a very upper middle class family. He grew up in Bombay. Well, I call it Bombay. The name has been changed to Mumbai a few years ago. It's this very cosmopolitan financial capital of India. He went to some of the best schools and so on. But this is what Ranjit said to me. Well, the thing is, my schooling was in 2016 to 2018. Before you come out, you have internalized homophobia. If I see someone who is slightly effeminate, someone who might have been queer, maybe because they were in dramatics, I would literally run the other way. I'm like, I don't want to be associated with this person because they will out me. Okay, so he was very afraid of how his peers would treat him if he came out. And he also talked about how the other guys, the straight guys in his peer group would enforce norms of masculinity, okay? So he said, I did hear incidents, right, from friends, and none of them were pleasant. For example, some guy was saying that he was being sexually abused by a batchmate, and it was not super consensual, but he was so ashamed of it, he couldn't even tell anybody. So I've not heard of one good story. Therefore, so this was in the context I was asking him when he started to date and so on. And so he was talking about how incredibly in the closet he was, because being outed would put him in danger of abuse, including sexual abuse and so on. So he was frightened to do it. So that's why the end of this quote is, so no dating for me at all. Another young man, Arvind, actually grew up in Chicago, and he had a very different, I'm going to be very interested in seeing your reaction to his quotes, okay? So he grew up in Chicago, and here's what he said to me. I am lucky to have lived in two different societies, the Indian Norm Society and the Indian Open Society. In the US, even though we say the American Open Society, they are more homophobic and racist and shit like that than Indians. I have faced less homophobia in India as compared to America. So this was very interesting for me. So as I was interviewing him, I sort of went back. I said, can you tell me a little bit more, And so he did. He said, in America, there are three main things: racism, homophobia, and bullying. As a high school student, I used to be the football captain, so it was pretty hard to bully me. But there were words out there behind my back, okay? And I was an Indian, so I was automatically an alien to them. But when I came out to my friends in India, their first reaction was, okay, that explains a lot of things. So Indians were pretty open about it. America says it's an open society, but in reality, they're the most homophobic. Indians pretend to be homophobic when actually they are not. So that was his experience, which is not the same as Ranjit's experience, but he actually found that he was more accepted in India than he was in Chicago, right? Not even a little small town or something. He was living in Chicago, and that was his experience. So the experiences of lesbian women and trans males. So a young woman called Manju that I interviewed, she said, I accidentally came out when I was in 8th or 9th grade at the age of 13. I told my friend that I liked her. My friend went and spread that among our peers and classmates. It was messy. I was bullied and shunned. It got better when I went to college. And I also spoke to somebody who is the director of an organization called Sappho for Equality. It's an organization that works with trans males. And so this is what they told me about their clients, okay? Most clients are fleeing family violence, corrective rape, burning, etc. Clients tend to be survivors of extreme domestic abuse. And then they went on to say, they are economically disadvantaged. Many have been declassed because they have been thrown out of the family after they came out. So what they meant by declassed is the fact that many of them may have been from the middle class or even upper middle class families, but the fact that they were thrown out of their homes means that they had lost their class status. Okay? Some leave school because the education system is very gendered. Many leave in class 8 or 9, that's 8th or 9th grade. Some have been married off very young. For example, married at 14 and realize they are transmasculine when they are 18. So those were some of the stories of coming out, okay? And I was able to interview Ranjit's mother, and it was very interesting to get a mother's perspective on the son coming out. So this is what she said. And by the way, all the names are changed. These are not anybody's real names. Shruti. I was shocked for exactly 10 minutes, Sunita. I did not know what to do or say. But after 10 minutes, she opened her arms, and she said, "Are, you are my son." Okay, so I was interviewing her on Zoom. So, I sort of, I go back and watch this video, and it's very moving to me when she talks about how, like she's stunned and, but at the same time, her love overcame her. But she also then went on to say about her husband's reaction. She said, "To be frank, Sunita, my husband was a little conservative, more than me. He tried to work his way around it and finally came to terms with it. He was very keen to get Ranjit married. So in other words, he thought that if his son could just get married, then somehow he can fix his gayness, okay? So he said, his Ranjit's best friend is a girl, Ipshita. And my husband went on and on, why don't you marry Ipshita? Why don't you marry Ipshita? In front of my husband only, my son would tell Ipshita, my father wants me to marry you. What do we do? Later, he realized that he's wasting his time and making my son more miserable. So, he kind of came around to accepting his son after that. So I'm going to, there's one more example I realized this. So the only person, I gave you all those examples, historical and cultural examples about non-normativity in Indian history, right? Gods and so on. And interestingly enough, Arvind, the one person who didn't grow up in India, was the one who went to Indian heritage to convince his father to accept him. So the only person who leaned on Indian/Hindu heritage was the person who grew up in the US. So none of the Indians talked about that as the way in which they convinced their parents. So Arvind said, I actually came out to my dad 3 years ago when we moved back to India. My dad was not okay with it at that time. I used to work for an NGO, a non-governmental organization, and I did a bit of research on Hinduism and homosexuality. And they were way more related than we even think. Homosexuality was mainly originated in Hinduism. Okay, that's not true, but that's his perspective. I made my dad aware of that and even went to places with him to explain everything to him. Now when I tell my dad I'm gay, he's very okay with it after being educated about it. My dad told me I was born and brought up in Delhi, and what happened was that those things didn't exist. At least it didn't exist in an obvious way, right? The main reason is the politicians. They were the ones saying things like, okay, I'll just say that in English, these things don't happen here, they only happen in the West. My dad was like, nobody's actually aware that these things are very normal in Hinduism. Okay? So, and I found that among those who are educated, they speak English, their lives are very different from those who are from the economic margins and don't speak English. So some of the young men and transgender women, Aravanis, that I interviewed, came from the margins of society, okay? And so MSMs and Aravanis. So if you're not English speaking, in Indian languages, there isn't really a word that would be like gay or something like that. Who I have sex with is what I do, it's not who I am, right? So there's not a term identifying a person based on sexuality. So the word that's used by quote unquote gay men would be MSM, men who have sex with men, okay? So MSM and Aravanis were different from female sex workers in their relationship with their clients. So MSMs and Aravanis spoke of pleasure and emotional connection as part of their commercial activity. Because many of them would seek in their clients the man of their dreams, okay? Which the women, cisgender women who are sex workers didn't think of their clients in those terms at all. Sagun, for instance, said, I told you about the hot spot area, it's a cruising spot. There in front of the railway station, there's a washroom. Front of the washroom, there's a sitting part. That's where people sit. So chai wala, that is the person who makes tea, lorry wala, truck drivers, They all sit there. We used to go and sit there. So in other words, that's where he would try to seek partners among truck drivers and so on. So since many of the MSMs and Arvanis sold sex as a way to find romantic partners, their clients can be very violent. Mohan, one person that I interviewed, said, I have a friend, an MSM. He was taken by 3 men to a room. When he asked them to use a condom, they beat him up mercilessly. He had to be hospitalized. And I won't go through all this, but many of them didn't use condoms with their clients because, they found them attractive and didn't want to use condoms, okay? The other way of finding relationships is through Tinder and Grindr. So Ranjit said, Grindr is so toxic. I used to use it, say, from 2017 to 2020, but it kind of affected my mental health. It affected my image of myself so much that I said I would never use this app. After 2nd January 2020, I said to myself, I will never download this app again. Grindr makes you focus only on a grid of semi-naked men, almost all of them without face, headless. It's essentially only for hookups. I was joking about this, but it's literally like ordering an Uber or an Ola ride. So, Ola is like Uber in India. It is literally how easy you can get sex. Any city, anywhere. There are some negative issues. Then there's also body image issues and the danger to life and money and reputation. There's a lot of abuse that happens there. There's literally like drug-fueled parties and orgies, and everyone is advertising these things. Arvind said he does use the internet to find sex workers, male sex workers. There are many e-dating apps in India, and I have used them. There is a different category in them that's for paid guys. To be a bit frank, I'll say paid guys are better because this is their work, their job, they're better at it compared to normal people. That's what he used, like the term. This is why people pay for sex. Sometimes you need that pleasure. And so, wow, I really kept to the time. So I have one last slide where I want to end on a happy note. I've talked about people having sex without condoms, putting themselves in a lot of danger, and so on, and then Tinder and Grindr as being problematic. But then Ranjit said something that he uses that in a very positive way. The thing is, I'm now on Tinder and Instagram. I do meet a lot of guys, but it's not as if I have to have sex with them. We can go for a walk, we can go to a restaurant, discover the city. It has become much better for me because any city that I go to, I can get accommodations, I can get the best recommendations on what to eat, I can get the most creative kind of outing because I'm like in a secret club. We have something shared, like a shared sense of identity. So it's absolutely easy for me to connect with anyone in any part of the world. I think this is a big gift. How often do you meet people from multiple professions, right? Chefs, I meet hotel staff, I meet airline crews, scientists and architects, artists and influencers, and anyone and everyone. So he doesn't use Grindr and Tinder for sex anymore, which he used to, but he uses it to simply find companionship and a sense of community. So I leave it at this so that we can have some time for questions from you all. Right. Yes. Can we get a mic there? Because there's some kind of a buzz from here, so I can't really hear you. Maybe we can, yeah, okay. Let's do this.
So
Yes.
it's about what that person likes, who you quoted in the beginning, like with how they were comparing American, like Western culture.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm kind of wondering like why they chose Western culture when there's like when it when there's when there's sorry when there words there
I think
Gender-
yeah. Are you saying that maybe, you know, the fact that there is
yeah
in Indian culture itself, there's all this, right? Is
yeah,
that
and
is
there's
that, yeah.
other examples too, like for example, Norse culture with Loki, and there's lots of gender fluidity in history.
Absolutely. So, you know, the thing is, you can imagine the people who are saying this are, of course, people who don't know Indian culture itself, right? Like, and so, you know, the thing is, those stories about the gods, right? It's not as if nobody knows that. Ayyappa is a god, that there's a huge pilgrimage that happens every year. So everybody knows about Ayyappa. Everyone knows that he has two fathers, right? And but there's a sort of a disconnect between that and thinking of two gay men in your own world, okay? And people who are sort of in that kind of mindset, to them, there is India, and then there's something called the West, right? And so they're not thinking about America versus Britain or, you know, Norse or things like that. To them, there's just something out there called the West, and all the bad stuff is there, versus there is India, and this is, you know, all heteronormative. People only have sex with their married partners in a heteronormative relationship, right? So it's that kind of need to believe that. Okay? Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yes.
Is this particular anti-colonial nationalism on this particular topic, is it mostly a national Indian nationalism phenomenon, or is it just as strong in the region? States?
In the States. So I think this idea that same-sex, okay, I think rather than it being regionally different, I think my answer would be that it's a certain generation of people who've grown up within post-colonial India who think that. I'll give you an example. You know, my mother moved to the US in 2011 after my father died. And since her time here, her two best friends are these two gay men, okay, they're married in a relationship, and they love her, she loves them, and all that. And so one time, as we were talking about homophobia in India, you know, something was in the news, and as we were talking about that, we were driving, and I said to her, so how is it that you are so open? And she looked at me as if I was a bit daft, and she said, but it's in our stories. And, you know, so that's her, right, you know, by our story, she means, you know, the Hindu mythologies and so on. And one of the people I interviewed, I call her Ananya, she told me the same thing when she read about same-sex sexuality. She was, you know, she was kind of encountering it for the first time. She's very close to her grandfather, and she went and, you know, she asked him, and he brought all these texts like the Mahabharata and all that and said, see, this is something that has existed in our culture, right? And so I think, and so she's from Western India, my mom's, you know, from Southern India, grew up in Malaysia. I mean, all that. I think rather than it being regional, that rhetoric, that nationalistic rhetoric, I think is something that people of a certain generation heard, right? So people in their, even, you know, in their 60s and under probably believe that. And my mom, who's in her 80s, actually has a much more open-minded view of it. So rather than regional, I think it's more about, yeah, how much exposure you have.
And I definitely have a follow-up question.
Yes.
Because you mentioned that the anti-colonial Indian nationalism started expressing this anti-LGBT, homosexuality of Western
Yeah.
after the penal codes. were
Yes.
created, and you see that other colonies. So that version of Indian nationalism developed that little aspect to it.
Yes.
In the 19th century.
Yes.
In the early 20th century.
Right.
So if it's a generational thing that has come and go, if it's always been there, are you suggesting that it's only been salient?
Well, the
during
thing
this
is,
one period?
yeah, so what happens is, when you think about it, so when the British left, the number of people who could even just read and write was minuscule, right? And so, things are being taught. So, here are some of the things that happen. You have all these people writing all this homoerotic ghazals and so on. Their patrons are the kings. After in 1857, when you have the revolt in India and basically the British kind of take over India at that point, and you find that all these poets were writing to Queen Victoria saying, now that you are our queen, would you give us the patronage that we've always got? They never got a response to that. And so many of them had to seek jobs in British-run universities as translators and so on. So what you find is that they start erasing things, right? And anything that's written by them is now, it kind of, in fact, you find things like, there's no word called unnatural in Urdu, okay? Because anything that humans do is natural, right? So remember the phrasing of Section 377 is acts against the order of nature. So they had to come up with a word for unnatural. So, you find that kind of thing, but then there aren't that many people getting educated, right? And so after India becomes independent, as people are getting educated, this is what they hear.
So the sameness is actually caused by education.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah. And you have more, there are changes in media, right? You have the All India radio, so there's a certain idea of nationhood and Indian culture that, Bollywood and all that are creating. All that gives a sense of what you should be, right? So, yeah. Yes, go ahead. Oh, do you need the mic?
My question is, the person who was from Chicago,
Yes, Arvind, yeah.
do you think one of the factors in his acceptance when he went to India over compared to when he back to America might have been the fact that he was American, that he might have looked differently upon it because he wasn't fully from India, but his blood, but instead he was American? Is that how,
Yeah, I sort of saw his social milieu, the kind of, and I don't think that was entirely the case, I mean, I think he was talking about generally his relatives and everybody, right? I mean, he comes to India and it's not just he and his dad, but suddenly there are all the relatives as well, extended family, right? So it isn't, he quoted his, the part that I quoted was his friend saying, okay, but it was also the extended family that he felt that they were all accepting of his sexuality in a way that he just didn't find in Chicago. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all. It's a great questions.
thank you, Professor Manian, for your participation this evening, and I'd like to thank the students, faculty, and staff that joined us, and for GSW TV for filming. I'd also like to remind you, if you are in a class here that has been offered extra credit for attending this event tonight, please make sure that you sign in the back of the room with Dr. Bergeron. Thank you.